Welcome back for our second video on the AN5835-1, the all-plastic version of the E-6B produced in World War II. In our last video, we looked at this example from 1943 from the U.S. Army Air Forces by Kruver Manufacturing. Wanted to look at two other models, two other manufacturers in this video, just to look at some of the differences that are there between them. So we have a 1944 version here from the J.B. Carroll Company. And notice that the hour markings on this computer are similar to what we saw here on the U.S. Army Air Forces version, where we have the hours marked in whole numbers, so 2 hours, 3 hours, etc., versus the Felsenthal version of this flight computer, where the hours are marked in hours, minute, 200, 300, etc. Other than that, the construction is just slightly different. You can tell that the center rivet is different between the three manufacturers, and then these plastic nubs that are used for manipulating the device are slightly different. We have these raised squares, these small circles, and these large circles here on the J.B. Carroll. If we look at the backs of the flight computers, there's really no differences to note. The J.B. Carroll still has the lanyard holder. That's cool. The type is just a little bit more bold on the J.B. Carroll, which I think I prefer. Kruver has branded their flight computer down here on the bottom, where Felsenthal and J.B. Carroll did not. But other than that, it is essentially, these were essentially the same computers. Oh, the other thing to mention too is that after 1943, these computers were no longer branded for the Army or the Navy. They were just generic computer, Dead Reckoning computers. One of the things that we've talked about in these videos on flight computers is that a challenge was they had to be redesigned as aircraft grew faster and faster. And so we see that here. This is an extended slide, which was used for aircraft going all the way up to 800 units, whether that's miles per hour or knots. So this is an extended slide. Should compare the grids here so you can see. An extended slide. This was often branded as the E-6C slide. Otherwise it was the same, but this card would have slid into any standard E-6B flight computer. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a problem. Today we'll look at a radius of action problem, which is often seems like a complicated series of numbers to compute, but we'll make it as easy as possible. So radius of action just means we're going to go from a moving base. So say we're going from an airport and we're going to fly on a certain track in one direction to see how far that we can get before we have to turn around and come back and not run out of fuel. So this is a trivial problem if there's no wind. So for example, if we were doing 145 knots and we had 4 hours of fuel and there was no wind, well then we could fly outbound on this track for 2 hours and come back in another 2 hours, and we would have covered 145 times 2, or 290 nautical miles. But as soon as you introduce the wind, it's a little bit more complicated to compute. And so just do this step by step and as easy as possible. What we're going to do is start by finding our ground speed on the outbound leg, and then our ground speed back on the inbound leg. And we'll use those two numbers to compute the rest of the problem. So again, we're trying to figure out how far can we fly from our base with this wind before we run out of fuel. All right, so first thing we need to do is we need to plot the wind, 030. So we set that on our true index here, 030 up at the top. And then we need to mark a wind vector that is length 32. So I set my grommet here on 100. And what I'll do is I will put a dot up on 32, 132. And to make that clear, I will go ahead and draw the wind vector as a line. So we'll bring this down from 130 to 100, 132 to 100. Okay, so that's our wind vector. Next step, we have to calculate our ground speed on the outbound leg, which is a course of 270. So we set that on our true index, 270 up at the top, heading of west, or at least a track of west. And we take the tail of our wind vector and we put it on our true airspeed of 145 knots. So I set that right about there, 145 knots. And we can read our ground speed outbound as 158 knots. So we'll go ahead and we'll pencil that in. We're going to be doing 158 knots on the way out. And then we take the reciprocal of that when we're coming back in. So that's going to be down here at the bottom, 090. Flip that around, set that at the true index. Put the end of the wind vector on 145 knots, which is our true airspeed. And we read our ground speed here at the grommet, and it's 126 knots. So that's our ground speed coming back in. So we've got a tailwind heading out and a ground speed, a headwind coming back in. All right, the next step here is to complete this formula. So we've got a time to turn. We need to take our ground speed back in times our fuel and divide that by our ground speed out and our ground speed back in. So let's just go ahead and do the addition first. So 158 plus 126 is going to be 4 and 8, so 284. So we'll have 284 on the bottom. And then above that, ground speed 2 times our fuel. So that's going to be 126 times 4 hours of fuel. Now we've got a multiplication here. I know many of you can do that multiplication in your head with no problems, but we're going to do it on the flight computer. So we set our index here at 126. So that's right there, 120, 125, 126. And we just find 4 hours on the inner scale. And how far are we going to fly in 4 hours? It looks like it's about 504 nautical miles. So this ends up being 504 divided by 284. And that's going to tell us the time in minutes till we turn. So let's go ahead and do that division. We'll do that on the flight computer. So that's pretty easy. Big number goes on the outside, top goes on the outside. So 504 is right about here. And we need to put 284 below that. So here we go. There's 290 and 280, 282, 284, and we'll bump it right about there. Okay. And if we look here at where the 1 index is, that tells us in hours how long before we have to turn. So it would be 1.78 hours. Or if we look at the 60 index marker, that'll tell us in minutes. So this looks like it's going to be about 106 minutes. So our time to turn is 106 minutes, which nobody really thinks like that, so let's write it the way we would say it, which is 1 hour. And is that right? 1 hour and 46 minutes. There we go. It's a little bit of a mind bend. But 106 minutes is 1 hour and 46 minutes. So that's our time to turn. And then in order to find our radius of action, what we need to do is we need to take our ground speed on the way out, multiply it by that time to turn. So that's going to be 158 knots times 106 minutes, or as we've said, 1 hour and 46 minutes. And that is going to give us what? So go ahead and we set our speed index on our outbound speed, 158. So that's right there, 158. And then we look for 1 hour and 46 minutes, or 106 minutes, if you prefer. So 106 minutes is going to be right about, what do we got here? 100, 105, 106. 280 nautical miles is our radius of action. 280 nautical miles. Now, if you recall, in a no-wind condition, we said that we were going to be able to do 290 nautical miles from base. And with the wind, we've reduced that by 10. So with the wind today, we can only fly 280 nautical miles. Now, there's actually a better way to compute this. This is going deep into the math territory here and also some obsolete technology. But we had three operations that we had to do here. We had to do an addition, we had to do a multiplication, and we had to do a division. And when you're working with a slide rule, and a flight computer is a slide rule, there's often a best way to order those operations so that you can get by with minimal movement of the slide. And so if we rewrite this same formula that we used to have the addition first, then the division, and finally the multiplication last, what we find out is we only have to move the front face of the computer once. So if we rewrite this again, so I'll put in our numbers here, and you'll see how we just have to move the slide rule once. Ground speed 2 was 126 knots. We would divide that by this addition, which we said up here was 284. And then we'll multiply that by 4, which is our fuel. And we should get the same answer that we got above, but you'll see what I mean here about we only have to do this once now. So 126 divided by 284. So 126 on the top is right here. 284 we bring in, so let's see, 126 is right there. There's 284. And we don't care about the intermediate answer here. All we have to do is find, because it's already set for us. This is the intermediate answer. We won't even bother with it. But it's set up to multiply by 4 now, so if we come here to 4 hours, we find the exact same answer of 106 minutes, or 1 hour and 46 minutes, which is the same answer. So that's a faster way to compute the same answer by just changing the order of operations. So we did the addition, then the division, and then the multiplication, as opposed to doing a multiplication, an addition, and then a division. So as you get sort of proficient with these old analog computing devices, you learn little tricks like that in order to get faster and to have more accurate answers. So that's pretty much it, except, oh, I forgot, there is the Weems to talk about. So the all-plastic E-6B after the war was released for civilian pilots. We don't have the glow-in-the-dark paint anymore, but we have some other things that are rather nice about this. So the first thing to say is this construction should look familiar. If you compare these grommets and you look at these plastic nubs, you'll see that it's highly likely that this civilian device was produced by Felsenthal. And the other thing to note about this is it restored the name of the inventor. So when Weems produced this, they returned the copyright here of copyright Philip Dalton, and also named the device after him as well. So it's the Dalton Dead Reckoning Computer, which is a nice homage to Philip Dalton, especially after his name was removed from the 5835-1. So after World War II, the restrictions on the use of aluminum were lifted, and the U.S. Army Air Forces became the U.S. Army Air Force, and they got a new flight computer towards the end of the 1940s. And so if you want to find out about the cool features that are associated with that, check out the next video. Thanks for watching.